Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Justin Palmer Show. Today's consciousness known as my guest, Shane Davis, the creative force behind Public Records NYC, it's a phenomenal establishment. And I'm very grateful that they've navigated through COVID and the challenges of being challenged with the challenges of being closed during the COVID, whatever this thing is. Shane shared his incredible story, just very humble beginnings, kind of connected with the workforce in a very typical way, and decided to branch out on his own and created this creative vortex of a place in Brooklyn called Public Records NYC. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. This was an incredible one. We covered a lot of ground, very deep and meditative conversation. Enjoy the show.
It's the Justin Palmer Show. Here we go. Woo! Woo!
Okay, Mr. Shane Davis.
Hey,
How's
man.
it going in New York City?
It's going good. How's it going over there?
It's normal. It's normal as normal can be out here for sure. I mean, the weather doesn't really vary that much, which is nice. I was thinking about this the other day. Just the luck of leaving New York City in March was it was a real blessing for my family. And just hanging outside and getting to do some cool outdoor stuff like fishing. My son's birthday was the other day, and I told him I'd catch him a fish, and we'd only caught ones that you could throw back, and I caught him a nice little fish to fillet for his
Pulled
birthday,
it
which
off.
is like yeah.
You nailed it.
Yeah, I put that out into the universe, the universe provides.
That was a bold move, I feel like.
I had mastered.
Where was your
bait.
headspace in there? Were you just like laser focused? I got to do this.
No, I was at peace with it. It's one of our neighbors. He's like a master fisherman. He grew up fishing in Texas, and he's just been like coming down when I'm in the water and giving me super pro tips. Like every time he sees me, he's just super nice. And one of them is that there's these little, we call them sand turtles. I don't even know what they are. They're like a crustacean that live in the sand. They only come out to eat these things called Portuguese man-o-wars, which are a small jellyfish. So when the man-o-wars are out, we were like afraid of them at first because they sting you and it's super uncomfortable. It kind of feels like a kettle is burning you slowly.
Lovely.
Yeah, you actually get used to it and it's not even that bad, but the first time you're like, what is that? But you take these things and you toss them at the edge of where the waves are coming up onto the beach, and the sand turtles come out and you can get them with a shovel. And these sand turtles are the best bait. Like last Saturday, I was using them as bait, and every time I cast out, something was biting.
That's pretty amazing. So you talk about having an idyllic experience. You move into this awesome house in Hawaii, and then just some old like head fisherman stumbles upon and starts dropping knowledge on like the local tradition and culture. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I am a believer the universe provides,
Yeah, it's cool. I guess we have different, but when we caught up the other day, somewhat similar trajectories of very conveniently with having the opportunity to leave New York right before things got super dark. It's kind of interesting, to think about just how vastly different experiences some of us have had based on just circumstance. I mean, it sounds obvious, but we got back to New York right when things had settled down and people were feeling positive and the energy was just like amazing. But, I have no idea what it felt like viscerally, preceding that. And I wonder,
Yeah. It's, I didn't have any regrets or any issues with bouncing like that, we were just talking about that before we started. The process of kind of deciding to leave New York, especially when you're an entrenched New Yorker, at least for me, the idea of leaving New York is just not palatable.
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no, you get in this mindset of like, there's no place that could even compare. And it's such a weird mind fuck that it took years for my wife and I to kind of process how we wanted to look at designing our life. Now I'm wondering, I know you bought a house in Austin, you were able to get out. What prompted that decision to go down to Austin?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because my now wife was pretty inspired to leave New York for the past couple of years. And we used to argue about it, and I felt just like you, the idea of leaving New York, it was almost like the end of it was like fundamental life change that felt like a giant disappointment. It was like, what have I been working for? If I'm not in New York, because I feel like when you come up, especially when you don't come from much in New York, you're just on this path and this journey to create this hypothetical, circumstance. And even if you get to a point as you get older where you're not so consumed with, status or whatever it may be, you're still sort of, I think, subconsciously on this journey to achieve something that doesn't feel like it's attainable outside of New York. And I guess for me, I was building Public Records, my business at the time, so even more so, it felt like I still had a lot to do. And we bought the house really as an investment property. She's does a lot of work out there designing hotels, so we had spent some time. She went to school there, and it just seemed like an interesting investment opportunity. And just like a typical New Yorker, I thought about it like a project, right? It was like, let's buy this house, she'll design it, I'll brand it, we'll create this whole, sort of identity and story for it, and it'll be a project, right? Which is what kind of, I guess, what at first got me excited about it and got me committed. And then, when COVID hit, we had literally just finished renovating it. She had staged it for our first guests a couple of weeks prior. So it was literally all set up as if someone was going to come stay there like a hotel. And as soon as things got bad in New York, I was just like, let's go. I have a bad feeling about this. Let's just get out of here. Like, why even stick around? What's the, risk reward, right? And we went out there just basically based on, I guess, fear, to be honest, or, mitigating risk in a way. And, so I guess the house became this savior figure for us, right? Because we ended up having really an amazing time spent together, spent in somewhat of a state of quiet, although we were both ended up being extremely busy. And it just, I guess, sort of manifested this energetic quality within the house of an otherness based on what we would have been experiencing in New York. And I think that created a lot of light and positivity around that house itself. And it sort of started to feel more like home. So I guess it kind of happened naturally. I still feel, profound affinity towards New York. Coming back was really interesting.
What was that like?
First, I'll tell you, the first time we came back, and this was, I guess, 5 or 6 months later. And I, by the way, have been in, I grew up in the tri-state area. I call New York the city. New York has always been essentially in some way my home. So I've never lived anywhere else. And so we're flying back, and as we're landing, we looked outside and just saw that dreadful, concrete, just wasteland. And it felt just a sense of dread. It was a really intense sense of holy fuck, where am I landing into? I don't even see a tree. I don't see, life. It was pretty dark. And it was a little bit jarring at first. And but then when we got back, there's still nothing compares to New York. It's like that energy when you walk around the streets is still, there's still nothing like it. And things had just gotten better. I live in Fort Greene, so there were a lot of these, sort of block parties happening, and a real sense of community that I don't think we really ever felt in New York to that level. I felt it at my place and sort of the community that we built there, but it's just, there's really an amazing sense of unity on the streets and positivity. And it was summer, and it just became really awesome. And I think very quickly we started having, all these sort of nodes started just activating, and different, feelings that, ultimately led us to fall in love with New York in the first place, and kind of fell in love with it all over again. So now
That's
it's,
beautiful.
let's just say it's a conflicted relationship at this point.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched on something a minute ago, which is the sort of the need for achievement around New York. It's tied with that in some weird cosmic way, even the saying of like, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. That really embodies the spirit of New York. And it's what you just described. My wife and I had that same experience. We came back from, we were in Maui, and it was our first trip together since my 7-year-old at the time was born. We hadn't gone together. We just had, we banged out 3 kids, and we were just in it. And I was traveling a lot for work, going coast to coast. And so I didn't want to travel on the weekends or, anything in between, because I literally was flying 40 hours a month. And when we came back from Maui, we both looked at each other and we were like, this looks like a post era wasteland. I don't even, like, it was the same thing. We both just were like, this is a wasteland. We have to leave. Yeah. And the weird thing was, when that was in, I think, November of 2019. So we started planning, and we had just come from Hawaii. So that's how this all came together. But that communal aspect is definitely, you're in such close proximity to people that it's easy and hard at the same time to build a community in New York, right? Mm. Because everyone's so busy doing different things that no one ever really stops, or very few people do, in my experience. And I think a big part of that is because it's tied to achievement. And I think if you're experiencing New York in like a different way now. Are you like rushing through the days like you were, or you feel like there's more of a baseline kind of piece to your day?
Yeah, I mean, not having to travel New York is huge, right? I think, and I've been, I guess, fortunate, in the sense that the last couple of years, my business, and my home are within walking distance. So that was a huge, like, fundamental shift for me, to be able to not take public transportation, or just not be in a rush any day, and to like enjoy breakfast, and then at some point head over, to my space and see the same people. So I was sort of fortunate that I had a little bit of that community vibe in my day to day, which a lot of people, including my partner, didn't necessarily have. So I've been in that pretty good headspace in that sense for a while. I think once you start going back and forth and traveling all day, that's rough, because there's just such intensity in that, getting in a cab and going to Manhattan. It sounds kind of entitled, but it's not the most pleasant experience. And I think it's tolling on you. So, even now, not really having less obligation to travel, I think you see it like in the park. Everyone's just hanging out. It's pretty amazing. But one of the things that I think I've realized is so interesting about New York compared to a lot of other cities, is sort of the layers of narrative and the layers of culture. A lot of other cities are great, but there's not necessarily a lot to unpack. And if you're someone who enjoys sort of diving in to cultural discourse and like understanding different nuances about, urbanism or culture or art. I find, it's hard for other cities. I haven't seen other cities really quite compare to New York, and those layers of context to really unravel, and which, whether it's consciously or subliminally on a day-to-day basis, is very mentally stimulating. And sometimes it's just walking down a street, and it's not necessarily an intellectual activity. It's just, even signage in New York, right? It's like, in other cities, you look at a sign that a restaurant puts up, and it doesn't have much of a relationship to the building, right? And sure, that's plenty of that in New York, but also, and some of it maybe I overthink, and some of it people like me overthink, but there's such a deep, complex story to the relationship that the methodology of creating that sign has to the building that exists within. Just little things like that could constantly keep you stimulated, whether you're actually meeting someone new or just really walking down the street. So that to me is what I think probably contributes to my love of New York from sort of a creative aspect. But to your point also, it is rewarding to look back and realize how challenging it is to build a life for yourself in New York. And I think, it might sound egotistical in some sense. And at some point, sometimes, and there's a lot of that in New York. I mean, there's a ton of ego in New York, and you and I can talk about that all day long from, our experiences in real estate. But I also don't think there's anything wrong with looking back and sort of, feeling proud, of the journey that it took to get to a point where, I'm not talking about being the man, but being able to have freedom and be in a position where you're doing things on your own terms and you're being creative and you're being appreciated. I mean, that's very rewarding in New York. And, I think I'm unapologetic about that.
Yeah, that's incredible. Cause I remember, I think you were contemplating leaving Hospitality House, and we had a conversation. We synced up at one point because you were like, "Hey, you're a young guy. You did your own thing." Like, what we had a conversation about it. I remember, and I wanted to know what kind of gave you that confidence, because you seemed very much on the fence of like, should you go out on your own? You clearly had like the creative energy and drive to do something, and it shows. Like, I haven't been able to see your space, but I was able to check it out online, and it is beautiful. It is like everything you would picture about a place to go and just experience the space is what you guys designed. It reminds me a lot of some of the early coffee houses in Seattle before coffee houses were a thing.
Cool.
And it's just got that vibe where you just go sit. So I was curious, like, what was it a process for you to kind of jump off on your own? And this wasn't the first thing you did, right?
It actually was the first thing I did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I guess to provide context, prior to Public Records, I was, as I was essentially doing hospitality consulting for my entire career, my entire life. I studied graphic design and branding, but never really practiced. Ended up getting involved in consulting and doing sort of creative direction for these real estate and hospitality projects. And that, I guess, sort of formulated some of my thinking around how culture can inject value into the built environment, which in a roundabout way kind of led me to where I am now. But I was there for 10 years and, continuously was doing better and better, and, didn't achieve financial success on the level of, some of my peers, but definitely relative to where I came from was making more money than, I had in my life, but was really feeling unfulfilled creatively and very stifled, and a lot of misalignment, with myself and the individual that I was working for. But I was super comfortable and, kept making more money, right? Same story that you hear a lot of people have. And, but I was sort of realizing that, I think you probably can attest this as well. Maybe, the more money you make, you just feel it's never enough, right? Because it's just all relative. And by the time you get to the next level, you actually feel, less abundance, than ever. And, it may have something to do with growing up in certain financial circumstances. So I was becoming really acknowledging of that, and trying to navigate it. But, I was fearful of making the move. My father, his sort of greatest challenge in his life is he was traumatized because he grew up poor and his father had lost his job, and he experienced this fear of essentially being impoverished. And that, I think, subliminally stuck with me my whole life, and I inherited some of that. And so sometime around this period when I started, sort of having the itch to finally make the jump, my father passed away, actually. and suddenly, unexpectedly. And through a certain, let's just say, psychedelic experience during the aftermath, I had this really intense, insane vision that in some way, shape, or form, his fear of his fear of poverty, and his essentially him being controlled by money, or fear of not having money, in some way led to his mysterious death. And for me, that was the moment. I literally went to the office the next day and I said, I'm out. This is it. I can't do this any longer. And so it really took a pretty big circumstance to give me that final kick. And it was really freeing. It was like, I've given this advice to a lot of my friends or individuals that I've had the opportunity to give advice to, that sometimes it's actually taking that step. You feel more free than ever, and less fear than ever. And so sort of serendipitously, my goal at that point was to build my own company. The thesis of, I'm going to utilize my experience building hospitality concepts as a way to activate real estate, whether it's acquiring it myself or, on behalf of clients that are, looking to acquire unique real estate. And serendipitously at the time, a former client and now friend had found this building. That was the historic building on the Gowanus Canal. It was built as the ASPCA headquarters. It had been inhabited by an amazing vintage guitar store and a church pipe organ restoration company. And it was just, I absolutely fell in love with the building and dove into it. And, that was the first project. And, for whatever reason, it ended up becoming really everything in the sense that the company evolved into that project. So it was first project, last project for that company.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like what a gift to discover in experiencing the loss of your father, that you were able to get such clarity out of it. Because I know, similar to you, grew up very humble beginnings, and that fear of not making it, or at least not making it financially, it drove my life up until 36, 37 years old. Literally drove my life. And it created a lot of drive for me, but there's also a lot of negative externalities. And the fact that you were aware of that and you're able to kind of break that cycle. I have this theory that I've been just ideating on about real intelligence, and the fact that it passes on through generations. And it's sort of your job as a kid and becoming an adult to break those cycles of your prior generation. And so it's pretty cool that you were able to do that. That's monumental in life, in my view.
I share your belief also about inherited, actual biological inherited trauma and, intelligence and all those other things as well. It's a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you went where you needed to go and got what you needed out of that experience, to kind of transcend that experience and create more freedom for yourself, which is I agree with you. You never know what's going to trigger that for you, but that inner freedom of just being able to create life on your terms is real. And I don't think enough people are tapped into that today. It's just a beautiful thing. It's something that I see my kids struggling, especially my 8-year-old, as he's coming up. He's got his ego is there. And I just try to give him little signposts as Chris Williams, the producer of the show, would say, signposts, right? To like find his path. I started leaving him things that I'm reading. I'll write like a sentence and leave it on his desk, and then he just picks it up and reads it whenever. And you know, that sparks an interesting conversation, but that's a monumental thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you look back, sorry to cut you off, but I'm just curious about your experience. You know, you look back, everyone has their own, you know, criticism of their own childhood, you know, at varying degrees. And, you know, it's easy to say if my parents had done things differently, I would have been a different way. But the truth of the matter is, like, I was such a fucking punk kid that you couldn't have told me, nothing you could have told me at a certain ages would have opened my eyes to the truths, you know, to the truths of the world. So, you know, I don't know what the strategy is. You know, like I said, I'm just kind of diving into fatherhood. It sounds like you're taking an interesting strategic approach, which, you know, not force feeding them, but, you know, sort of giving them the tools to contemplate. And yeah, I'm just curious how you reconcile with, you know, you clearly have developed a very strong set of values and beliefs. You know, how do you go about ingraining that without, you know, overdoing it?
Yeah, without indoctrination.
Yeah, exactly.
It started for me by actually taking the time to think about what my values and beliefs were. And I did that extremely, I don't know, I did it late based on my standards at the time. And it was similar to you. I got my real estate company to a point where I always knew it would get there because I knew I had that drive, but I was also way beyond where I thought it would be. And that ended up being this cliff into a black hole for me personally, right? Because I got there and I'm like, oh shit, I'm not happy at all. I don't like my day to day. I don't like what I'm doing. I don't like how it's doing. I don't like who I'm doing it with. You know, it's all of those things came up, and I took some time. I did a program called ESP, which is like similar to Landmark. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's basically like a 5-day thing where you go unplug and kind of discover what your real values are. And mine was family, because I grew up, you know, more or less without my father. And I realized that everything I had created in my life was kind of pulling me farther away from my children at the time. And so that was like a starting point for me to start consciously redesigning and rethinking what I was doing. And it takes time, dude. It definitely takes time, because you're letting go that ego component in real estate. Like, other than the movie business, real estate has to be top in terms of ego, you know? It's kind of ridiculous when you think about it. And I had a real bad case of it. And I was a very rambunctious kid, getting in a lot of trouble. I gave my mom hell, and she'll appreciate it because she listens to every episode. But I took years to peel back the layers, and I'm basically done with that in my experience, you know, because I've reflected on everything for a couple of years now. And I just realized that's just one way to live. You don't have to live that way. You can consciously choose to make those decisions every moment of your life. And the less you can associate with whatever identity, like, it's so people try to label everything, right? I tried to label everything. And the minute that I stopped labeling things and saying, what is this? You know, like, what is this really? And just kind of connecting with the human experience on a deeply conscious level, that transforms your daily experience. And so with my kids, I'm just trying not to fuck them up, right? I'm trying to give them, you know, my mom did the absolute best that she could, and my mom's a total hippie, and always gave us the love that we needed. There was a element of masculine energy and example that was missing from my life. And I had to go figure that out for myself. And that was part of my journey. Right. And I'm totally at peace with that. And with my kids, I want to give them the tools so they know. I don't know if they're going to process it, right? I mean, their brain is developing, but I just want them to be able to ask themselves the right questions at different points in their life, because their struggle is going to be completely different than mine. And it took me a while to even realize that I was framing a lot of things for my son in the context of the struggles that I went through. Like, I was very worried about him getting into drugs and like not connecting with the right people and having problems because of his, his social environment. And then it just hit me one morning. I was like walking him to school, and I realized he has a completely different experience. He grew up going to the buildings that I was building. Those were the formative, very early years. I would take him on business trips with him, just me and him. And we would go to the buildings and like go to a museum afterwards. And just like I had created a completely different experience. So that's a long way of saying that I'm really focused on being ultra present with them and giving them what they need.
Yeah, it's a great realization that it's just a completely different context, a completely different experience.
Yeah, huge. Yeah, and you'll see as you move into it. I think one thing that I'm really interested is providing more of a resources for new fathers. This conversation is a perfect example of it, because, my wife would try to get me to read books about being a parent. And I totally wasn't open to it. I was like, all right, I'll read the one chapter that's like for fathers in this one book. And I read it. I didn't really connect with it at the time. It was definitely me. It wasn't the book,
Right.
And I think that is a challenge. It's like creating some resources that young fathers can connect with, of like, hey, what are going to be my value systems around this? And like, what philosophy am I going to adopt as a father?
That's interesting. I'm curious. You're talking about sort of navigating New York and real estate in the professional world, which is essentially, just this sea of egoism, right? And one of the things I've always contemplated, and was contemplating much more so when I was still in that world, was I feel that a lot of people's stress is based on inauthenticity. I've found that I'm the most stressed and I'm the most anxious when I have to take a phone call with, sometimes it's like my own lawyer, and I feel stressed when I have to sort of put on a front in some way, right? And I realize, reflecting, that it's not stress about that call. It's not that person that's stressing me out. It's the fact that it's very stressful to act in a way that's not authentic to yourself, right? So, I've advised people, when they have anxiety surrounding navigating these professional situations, to really try to at all times sink into that authenticity, right? Because I found a lot of confidence in just the fluidity of my day is, substantially more positive when I can sort of maintain that mindset. But the question becomes, especially as you're younger in your career, right? If you're coming up in the game or whatever, can you navigate high-level professional world in New York or otherwise, while maintaining that sort of level of authenticity? Like, I was just reflecting earlier about, so I don't think a lot about, my work back in the day. And, a lot of times I was doing business with really good people, and I would try to do business with really good people. That was really important to me. Sometimes I remember this one time I walked into this, it was some like fund, I don't even remember the name, and they had just bought a hotel. I was introduced to them. I don't know, whatever it was. I walked in this guy's office, and he was wearing this like ridiculous 3-piece suit. And you just knew immediately that this guy was like, this isn't going to work. And he looked at me like, I had 3 heads because I was wearing sneakers or whatever it was. And it was the most awkward meeting. It was just, there was no human connection there. And for me, I was in that state where he probably sat down. I tried to break the ice, shoot the shit, and sort of have this immediate human connection, which I think is what provides joy both in my professional life and my just day to day, like those, momentary or lasting human connections. And it was just not happening. And I walked out of there being like, wow, like who the fuck is that guy? Who is that human being who can literally sit across the table from somebody else who, I had achieved some level of professional success and recognition at that time. I was not some, and even if I was a nobody, whatever. And it's just like, and I shook it off because, that's what I was doing at the time. But I'm just curious if you feel like, for some of our younger predecessors, if, how to navigate that, if you can maintain that level of authenticity and still get ahead based on your journey.
Yeah. I mean, dude, that's a great question. I think, I don't know if you can achieve that level of success because like you, I focused on building the bridge and being inauthentic to who I was. And that was hard because I grew up in such different circumstances than the people that I was around on a daily basis in the game of finance and real estate, and that was a lot of internal struggle for me to even just reconcile with that on a daily basis. It was like, okay, I'm a high school drop. I was labeling myself, I used to sell drugs. I'm a high school dropout. I did, this. I went to juvenile detention, and I'm looking around and I don't see any of that. And so I think you and I kind of came up at the outer edge of a different time where being yourself was still, there was still this like 1960s, 70s, 80s culture of you have to put up a wall. As a man, you have to put up a wall, and you go in, business is the battlefield. You're a warrior in business, and you go do whatever it takes to be successful in that feat. The world seems like it's shifted, and maybe it's because I shifted, where I just don't give a fuck anymore. Right? Like, and it's not like I have some crazy amount of money that allows me to not give a fuck. I just choose. I'm not judging myself in that situation anymore. So, and I'm not judging the other person. And so I think if you can start going into life in that, I mean, you have to figure out how to play the game, whatever game it is for you. I think the people that end up achieving success really early are the people that stay true to themselves, And that would be my advice is like, if you feel like you're faking something to become something, you are.
Yeah, maybe you're on the wrong path, right?
Yeah, like really take the time to think about what you want to do. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that come out of college and they're like, I want to be an accountant, having never done that job. I'm sure that there's people that really enjoy that. I hope my accountants do. But there's also people who do it as a matter of practicality. And I'm just using this as an example. I'm not picking on accountants because the world needs them. There's people that do it just because they're trying to make ends meet and they see that as the most efficient and viable path for themselves. But it may not be. And I think the more you open up to your own creativity, however you decide to apply that, which I think you're probably an expert on at this point, is the more you're going to enjoy your life, And I read something a couple years ago. I think it was this guy Mark Divine. He wrote a book called Unbeatable Mind. He's a Navy SEAL who wrote a really great book about meditation and kind of different ways that you can look at life. And one of the things early on in the book was write your own obituary, and like if you have the stomach for it. And I did it really early one morning before everybody in my house woke up. And man, that was a powerful experience because since that day, everything that I'm doing in my day, if I had 1 week to live, would I spend my energy doing this? I stopped thinking about time, right? Think about energy. And if the answer is no, then I'll leverage somebody else. I'll not do it. I'll just get rid of it. Whatever I can come up with.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? As you mentioned, if the model of an accountant, right? And I know a lot of people would probably respond to, what we're talking about with, saying that they don't have the luxury of doing that. And I don't know what the answer is. I'm with you on that, right? I think everyone needs to prioritize um, prioritize what makes them happy and what they find fulfilling. Yeah, I don't. It's a tough question, but I feel for the fact that we've created these sort of structural mechanisms with society that so many are stuck in this loophole.
Yeah, well, I think it's also a choice. That's one. The way I would look at it is that is one path of many that you can choose. And I would encourage people, especially right now. I'm reading Barbarian Days, A Surfer's Life, William Finnegan. I don't know if you've ever read that book. Man, it's a memoir of his experience growing up between California and Hawaii. And he became a surfer very young, around 10, 11. And I'm in the middle of the book right now, and he's 17, 18, and he's completely unplugged. He just brought a bunch of books to Maui, was working in a bookstore so that he could surf and try to surf as much as possible. And I think more people should do something like that.
Yeah.
Before you go work.
Sounds like the dream.
Right. Well, but he didn't have any money, and that's okay.
That's what most Europeans do, right? I mean, they totally have it right. I mean, the American mindset of, I have a younger sister who's I experienced it, a year or two ago, this collective mindset within their generation, at least where she grew up, that, before you're even out of college, you're thinking about what job you're going to have, what that status is within your circles. I mean, she doesn't listen to anything like that. She listens to something I tell her, but my biggest regret is not having just done the thing, whether it's Israelis or Australians or whoever, that just are off, and they're, having that year or two. I think that should be, status quo in society, and so important, because you don't know who you are at that age, and you can't really know who you are at that age. So why even try to define it? Your goal should be exploration. And yeah, sure, not everyone has the means, but you look at people from those countries, and they're out bartending and doing whatever. Anyway, I have an interesting question for you that just kind of popped in my head as we were talking through it. Despite the fact that you came from nothing, do you ever feel a sense of entitlement when you're thinking about these things, we're talking about these things?
A sense of entitlement to what?
So I just, as we were kind of talking through this, and, we were touching on this idea of everyone, or, the concept of, pursuing, your creative expression, creative freedom, whatever. And I personally, and I think this happens occasionally, felt this strange sense of entitlement, Shane, you have it good, but, looking back, nothing was given to me. I created it. Right. And I was curious if, now understanding that we sort of came from somewhat strangely similar backgrounds, if you ever feel, based on the way that you were socialized and the way that you were brought up, I wouldn't say a sense of guilt, but almost a sense of entitlement, based on, the luxuries and the freedoms that you have, despite the fact that you made it all happen.
That's a great question, and a very important one for the time that we're in. And I think I feel extremely fortunate to be American, and not in a tribal way, like I got to have free speech and I need to have guns and this America, not in that way at all. In the context of, regardless of if you can see it or not, if you are in this country, you are part of the Lucky Sperm Club today, right now, in this moment. And I don't feel the sense of entitlement, like I have to have this. I don't really care. We never had, money was a very scarce resource when I was a kid, extremely scarce, very scarce at times, and then mildly scarce at other times. But there was never a point where it was just there. My mom never got to that point. And a lot of it was by choice. She made the conscious decision to spend time with us and be able to shuttle me to sports things and, all of those things. I think, and I'm also a believer, I just have to note that I'm also a believer that like, I recognize that I did a lot of this out of my own will. There were also so many people. There's so many people that it helped me, whether it was a word or a sentence of encouragement at a time that I needed it. And there was like weird, strange things. Like when I first moved to New York, I had a duffel bag and I didn't know anybody. I actually knew one person, Brenna Alderman. She lived in Spanish Harlem and I hadn't talked to her in a really long time. She grew up in the town that I grew up in. She was my one point of contact, but we kind of had lost touch.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Olympia, Washington, outside of Seattle, which is like a very progressive Pac Northwest town. It's like old, like what Williamsburg was 5 years ago, my town was in the 1980s. Right? It was actually a beautiful place to grow up. And when I got to New York, I was sitting on the curb waiting for the guy who I'd rented this tiny, tiny room from in Spanish Harlem. And I just started walking around and I ended up meeting these Jamaican guys that were barbecuing on the street and playing dominoes. I was 23, 24. And I just started talking to them and asked them if I could have a beer. And I ended up hanging out with them all night, literally playing dominoes and like talking to these guys all night. And even that experience, because I felt so uncomfortable being in New York and being in Harlem by myself, these guys were just so warm. Like I will never forget that experience because they were so warm. They were so open. They were so fun to hang out with. And I never saw them again. But that kind of gave me this sense of like, okay, there's real people here in New York. And, you could go on forever about those experiences in life. And I just think, I fucking work for it, whatever I'm doing, whether it's creative or physical or whatever, every single day. I put myself in scenarios where I will be tested. I'm going to push the limits. I was talking to my mom the other day. And she was like, yeah, you always were like that. You always pushed the limits no matter what it was. And out here, I've created a very peaceful existence out here in Hawaii. And I still need that element of pressure. And so when I train, I'm putting myself in the hardest scenario. I've been running outside in full sweats, midday, hood up, black sweats, black sweatshirt, 90, 95 degrees, and I'm running 10 miles. And the other day I was like, why the fuck am I doing this? This is so uncomfortable. And I just realized that like in terms of the eternal scale, I need some pressure in my life and I've created a lot of peace for it. And so I counterbalance that in my physical training. So I don't know if that even answers. What's that?
Where do you think that comes from? The need to do it?
I just enjoy it, man. I enjoy it. I enjoy training mixed martial arts. I enjoy jujitsu, getting smashed the same as smashing someone. Like I enjoy it. I enjoy the pressure of life. I enjoy putting myself in those scenarios where you have to thread the needle to come out of that relatively unscathed, right? And I don't know. I think that's just part of the human, like everybody has a different experience and everybody has different needs. I have been told by a lot of other people, and I'm starting to recognize it more and more, that I have a very high need for uncertainty. So that's probably part of it, is like pushing it. I'm just pushing that need for uncertainty to the max.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder, how the trajectory of your life would have been different if instead of meeting those Jamaican guys and hanging out, you had been like, I don't know, mugged or just, right. Nothing happened. And I wonder if that instilled some sense of optimism or like idealism or beauty in you that in some way catalyzed or inspired like the next, the ongoing trajectory of your experience.
Yeah, I think we attract what we allow to exist in ourselves. And I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and I won't say who it is, because it was a kind of an intimate conversation about some lady problems. And I was like, look, man, on the eternity sign, right? The eternal scale of life, you are the center. Life and your feelings and emotions flow around from side. They go to the outer edge and they come back. They go to this and you come back. And I've really learned to just exist at the center at all times, no matter what is happening. I used to ride the scale out, I used to go wild with my emotions and feelings and all of those things. And while that is fun and interesting at times, it's also very unsettling as a human. And I think being at the center allows you to experience those things without passing judgment on them, and just recognizing the existence of those things in the human experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's pretty, it's something that's been on my mind recently. And it comes up time and time again. And I always go back, sort of into, you forget it easily, but time and time again, I've found that surrendering is the most effective way to take a big step forward. And so I'm raising money right now for a new project. And I hate raising money. It's thing I hate the most in the world, probably. And it probably has something to do with my childhood and that whole narrative that I, talked about earlier. I've realized that, strangely, when I stop worrying and stop trying and just ground myself and focus on, the practices that instill positivity in my life, I gravitate, things just start coming at me. And it's amazing. And it's so easy to forget about it because, it seems sort of counterintuitive, in a way, but I do believe, and I have experienced some of the benefits from, taking that approach, which also goes back to this idea of just, remaining authentic.
Totally.
But I think it's, it's another tough thing for people to reconcile, right? But I do believe that in a really amazing way, not trying so hard is often the way that, you instill those benefits.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's not about not doing the best that you can. It's kind of recognizing that you're doing the best that you can right now, and again, I think it goes back to judgment too. You have to just stop judging yourself, which is really, for me, it was very hard to do. It took a long time for me to figure out that equation.
I think for a lot of...
So what's that?
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you, have you done any reading about kind of surrendering, being at peace, or how did that come about? You've always had this element of this cool, calm, collected persona since I've met you. And it's really nice to see that you've settled into that authenticity, because I could feel it when we caught up a few weeks ago. And I just think it's an amazing thing to experience that. I was wondering did you have any guides along that way, whether it was books or people in your life?
There is actually a phenomenal book that I would highly recommend to anyone interested, called The Surrender Experiment. Have you read it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a phenomenal book. It's kind of over the top in the sense that this guy has this insane journey where he just literally starts meditating all day and crazy shit starts coming at him. So it's a little bit extreme, but I think it goes back, the big thing for me, the big takeaway from that book is, and I think we may have touched on this earlier, just the idea of expectations, right? It's we create these narratives within our life that, we aspire to sort of continue on this journey along this very this set and defined trajectory. And the truth is, we can't control anything. We cannot control a single thing, right? Yet we try to control everything. We try to essentially define and dictate our own lives. So I think the moment that you stop trying to dictate, and the moment that you realize that you can't control anything, you just relinquish any expectations of any outcomes. And so you're not leaving yourself susceptible to disappointment. I think it ties back to, Hindu philosophy in the sense that, you should sort of experience the same equilibrium, whether it's pleasure or pain. There's really no difference between them.
Right.
Something I think about as well often, and it's more prevalent now than ever, is just not really believing in good or bad. It just is. And that was something that really helped me navigate when my father passed away. When things happen that are, unthinkably tragic or sad, I think the only way to reconcile it is just, remembering the truth, that at least what I feel is the truth, that there is no such thing as polarity of good and bad. It just is.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of peace in sort of trying to instill that mindset in my day to day.
Did you, in that process, that's an incredible book. And I don't know if you've read The Untethered Soul, which is more of the Surrender Experiment is Michael Singer's story. It's kind of his memoir. Have you read his other book, The Untethered Soul? Oh, I would recommend, you would really enjoy that. I think you would really enjoy that. What I wanted to ask was, in that process of not labeling things good or bad, have you experienced any like detachment at times from life or a situation, or I don't know, in your business or any of those things?
I think people, first of all, I'd say that, it's challenging to live that in every second of the day, right? So I certainly haven't achieved a level where I'm maintaining that, in my entire life, but definitely some people that are close to me, may have commented at certain times that, I lack emotion, which I don't think is actually the case. Maybe it's a misinterpretation or a confusion, maybe based on my behavior and my approach to things. But I think that maybe has caused a little bit of a conflict, just, being perceived as not being so engaged, when in actuality, there's a lot of emotions. It's just, it's just a different perspective to it and approach to it. But no, I definitely feel very deeply for a lot of things in my life. So I think the two can coexist. I don't think, surrendering is not, I don't think it's being numb. I think it's just, it's letting go of expectation.
Yeah. I mean, that's very well said. I was going to use the word outcome, but it's the same thing, right? Where you're just kind of enjoying the process, right? The experience of it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard, to use a business term. It's hard when there's other stakeholders, right? Because, you could easily have the people around you, your business, maybe this is kind of what you're referring to, your business partners, your life partner, being like, what do you mean? You're just surrendering it, figure it out. Right. And it's hard sometimes to convey that you are figuring it out. It's just your own way of navigating, but yeah, it's interesting the dichotomy between being highly focused and highly motivated, and then also attempting to not place so much meaning on the outcome of that. Right. Not an easy thing to navigate, but when I am able to operate within that mindset, I definitely feel it's, fulfilling.
Yeah. Well, it's clear. I wanted to switch gears kind of into the business realm a little bit. It's clear when I see what you've created that you tapped into like the highest level of your creativity, both from a design standpoint, but also just from an idea. Where I talked to Laura Seges from CBRE in San Francisco last week, who wasn't really in the same business with you, but kind of is. She's at a much bigger shop. And I think people's general view is like, oh, retail's dead. And then you created this experience that's open, 18, 20 hours a day, that has become this thing in Brooklyn. And I'm just curious how that idea came together.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to unpack here, both from a business and I think like a psychological standpoint. How it came together, man. I mean, I have an amazing partner who's an insanely passionate individual. And I think our relationship, which was sort of newly forming at the time, was really a big part of what sort of birthed this, I think pretty unique concept, or concept's not really the right word, but, I think that, we blindly dove into the project, right? Because we fell in love with the building. He's a musician. We bonded over music, and, when this sort of opportunity in the building presented itself, it just seemed like the perfect opportunity to do something that was just rare. It seemed like a rare opportunity. And I kind of pushed away a lot of my pragmatism and just dove into it, because it just felt like one of those things. I'm sure you've had similar experiences where you just got to we'll figure it out. The answer is yes, and we'll figure it out. And, we bootstrapped the project. We didn't raise nearly enough money. And, we were working against really all the elements. It was an incredibly challenging building, right? It was our first real construction project, and it was an old animal shelter that it was an insane undertaking for people that were in our positions. And I actually think through the challenges and the restrictions and the lack of abundance and the lack of resources is really what inspired a lot of the authenticity and the sort of human touch that, ultimately injected the soul into the business that I think has made it resonate so deeply with a lot of people. So in a way, I think based on those 2 years, which were just, really tough, I think the outcome of that was actually really special. And I went through sort of my own, journey along that time. I mentioned I grew up studying design and doing design work, but I hadn't really practiced pen to paper. I was doing a lot of creative strategy, but I wasn't really doing pen to paper. And, at first I hired a branding firm, and just nothing felt right. You know what I mean? So I ended up doing it myself and kind of diving back in and, doing the whole thing myself. And, first we tried to hire a music director. Didn't work out. My partner dove in and do it himself. And so very naturally it became this, and I was doing these things because they were smart business decisions, right? The smart business decision, if I was a consultant, was you're the owner, you're doing enough, you're doing everything. Hire someone, outsource, hire the right people, put it all together, which is what I've been doing my whole career, right? Hiring the right people, overseeing them, strategy, process, whatever. And, I think we were so deeply motivated to connect this project that nothing felt authentic. And we ended up taking the reins and doing everything ourselves, from the interiors to overseeing the construction to the actual, day-to-day music strategy and direction and vision. And it was, it almost killed us. It was the most challenging 2 years of both of our lives, and caused a lot of challenges within, some of my personal relationships, and, definitely took some years off our lives. But I now believe more so in this sort of real DIY approach. It was almost this process that I had to go through to strip back all these notions that I had about how business is done in the conventional way, in the framework of New York real estate, in this sort of pragmatic methodology, and really do crazy shit, and some of it didn't make sense. The hours of operation did not make sense. No way does it make sense. It still doesn't make sense.
I was wondering if that was designed out of necessity of the pro forma or out of creative use of that space.
I mean, we wanted it to be a community space, and the daytime, does not make money, but the fact that people can just walk in there, and your friends walk in there, and you see the same people, and it's alive at all times. It's just crucial. I think with hospitality and with a lot of businesses like that, it's kind of binary, right? It's either it works or it doesn't work, or maybe it works and it doesn't work, and it's a thing. It's a special thing, And so sometimes you have to, I think sometimes you have to not think with such a, fiscal mindset, and do things for the culture. And I think both of us were at these really sort of pivotal times in our lives, and we just went for it, and we figured it out, and we opened without any money, which was crazy. Again, just we'll figure it out, just kicking it down the court and trying to make the right decisions, and I guess surrendering to it, right? With faith and confidence that, what we put into it, we'll get out of it in some way. And Another big thing I learned, both through diving back into design and just through the entire approach to business is I think creativity is really about sort of inputs and outputs, right? When you try to figure out the answer to the end of the problem from the get-go, that's not true creative work, right? Because the new idea exists in the process and the experimentation. And I think that's sort of converse to the approach of a consulting company or a real estate company, where you try to get it down to a science, create concepts, create business plans that are cut and paste, and that's the most likely for them to succeed. But I think the bar is set low at that level of success. So, throughout the entire process, it was about what sort of inputs can we throw into this and see what sort of outputs emerge. And I'd like to think that that's why it ended up equating to something that was truly unique and special. And again, that sort of resonated with a lot of people. So it was really an insane process and phenomenal learning experience, and a lot of lessons learned.
Yeah. What, in terms of challenges, what were some of the things that you went through, if you don't mind sharing?
From like a practical standpoint or more of a psychological standpoint?
Well, more the psychological, because everybody gives like business advice, right? But at the end of the day, like you were saying about good and bad, there's no such thing as business and personal life. It's just life. It's just experience. And the commercial component of what you're doing is no different than the creative creative exploration that you're kind of pursuing.
I think the biggest challenge that I'm always sort of thinking about is really the disconnect between culture and capital. And, again, from really early on in my career, my thought process has always been framed around this idea of, culture creating value, right? Like quantifiable value. But there's still, based on just the general economic parameters, it's very challenging to align in that sense, right? Because a lot of the things that we want to do don't drive revenue, right? But they drive sort of the intangible value that makes the place work and makes the place special. And so how do you align with but from an investor standpoint, right? Are they really receiving in those benefits, right? Maybe, right? From a building standpoint, are they really aligning in those benefits? Probably not. So I think the most challenging thing for us is waking up every morning and, doing the things that you want to do to, create, positive messaging, to inspire people, to support artists, to build community, all the while reconciling that there's, capital to pay back and rent to pay. And it seems like an obvious thing, but it's something that I always have tried to wrap my head around to find sort of different mechanics that could, align stakeholders and really, allocate benefits to those that are providing intangible value. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I think it's, I think you touched on something that's really important for people to start exploring today, which is culture and capital. And capital's been kind of driving, especially in the world that we come from. Capital drives the bus, right? And I think that's why there's so many places that would never or could never become what you've created. Because there is authenticity and this passion for respecting culture and respecting the fact that you don't need to know what may come out of this. You're focused on creating the environment that allows people to open up. And you can't boil that down to a pro forma in every case. It's not a stock. It's totally different than that. And I think the world needs more. If cities are going to continue to exist, the world needs way more of that, right? Because even New York, Manhattan, when you walk through Manhattan, to me, it feels completely soulless today. it feels like it's been gutted because everything, it's like CVS, Chase, Wells Fargo, CVS, Dwayne Reed, whatever, you know, it's just been stripped of a lot of that culture. And that makes a lot of sense to me.
I think it also has to do with intention. You know, when you walk around New York, Manhattan, you know, even when you do see, and listen, there are still some phenomenal places in Manhattan that have a lot of soul, and, you know, I find, deep value in new places that open up, you know, similarly. But, you know, a lot of times you'll see a place and you just know that it's just like venture backed, or like some guys trying to capitalize on a trend, you know, or like they're thinking scale, like the next X, the next Y, the next Z. And I think what a lot of people from the consumer standpoint gravitate to is just intention. And, you know, at some point in New York, it was evident, right? You went to the places where there was the people behind it created this sort of energy and environment that you wanted to attach to. And I think you see it less and less now. And obviously with everything that's happening right now, independent restaurants closing, you know, at rapid scale, it's very scary. So it's, you know, it's interesting, right? We would love to figure out ways to explore these value dynamics and make them more sustainable. We haven't quite cracked it yet. You know, I do think one of the things I found really interesting when we first opened up Public Records was, my background is not music. I'm a huge music head. You know, I have a pretty good knowledge of music, but not music industry background, right? My partner more so. And so there were all these artists that I listened to, I was fans of, I sort of placed on a creative and cultural pedestal. And they started sort of folding into the business, right? They were residents, they played live, they came and hung out. And it was just demystifying all these individuals for me. And I saw how many of them were like, you know, just getting by, like not actually really doing so well, like working second jobs. Like, and I just realized more and more so how much we've devalued art as a society, but how much value and like quantifiable value these individuals had, right? So, you know, early on, you know, it was a very simple equation. It's like, well, we can tap X artist for Y price, which is reasonably affordable relative to what I think is their value and influence, to build a scene, build a community, you know, build some sort of experience, incentivize them in the process. And that became very interesting to me. This idea of if you're methodical and strategic about it, how you can leverage the value of artists in a more systematic way to place so that there is more value placed on them. They, you know, receive those financial benefits, but, you know, the receiver of value being the business also, sees value in the process. And that's something that we've always tried to explore. How do we create these more sustainable relationships and programs where, you know, it enables us to succeed as a business while supporting artists, but in a, you know, not in a charitable way, in a capitalist way, really. And so in the future projects that we're working on right now, outside of the physical space, I mean, those are the type of things that we want to explore in a more scalable standpoint. And I would like to see more of that conversation happening.
That's a beautiful thing. Yeah. Well, I think you're on the early edge of changing the winner takes all mentality, right? And converting commercial elements into, they're still capitalist, but it's you have to create scenarios where everyone wins. Otherwise it's not sustainable for long periods of time. And so you mentioned future projects. How have you guys thought about the uniqueness of what you've created in Brooklyn versus scale and probably some element making it big enough for you to achieve some of the financial outcomes that you want or need in your life?
Well, you know, COVID definitely put a wrench into a lot of our plans. But, you know, we haven't lost really any energy. And I think if anything, feel more energized now than ever. we feel like we respond really well to challenges, and kind of like we both talked about in different contexts, finding sort of, like, succeeding in those harsh conditions, right? Or finding inspiration and motivation within those harsh conditions. So maybe we feel some of that too. Right now, on premise, our goal is to really not only maintain the level of creativity and innovation that we've embodied, but really take it to the next level, given the reactive environment to the circumstances. So we're planning actually some expansion within the physical space, which is probably quite counterintuitive to what a lot of people are doing right now, and certainly isn't easy to find the resources to make that happen. But we're committed to doing so. And the big thing that we're working on now is building a tech product, which is not it would be sort of a brand extension to Public Records, but will be not a departure, but a new entity, new brand, but with similar sort of ideals and philosophy as what we've embodied in the physical space. Sort of playing off this idea of leveraging the cultural value of artists to create a benefit to society, while also creating pathways for artists to create more income and sustainable lifestyle.
Okay. And is that going to be just in music or all forms of art?
It's going to start in music, and the hope is that it can transcend to all mediums and art forms.
That's awesome. That's pretty exciting. I think it takes a lot to stomach a COVID-like scenario as a physical business, right? As a physical location, and look through that to expansion and change and more innovation. That's pretty incredible.
I think, yeah. For me personally, I find happiness in building things, whether it's physical or non-physical. I'm not an operator. Operations is not what fulfills me. So, and I think creativity and creation is about problem solving, right? Anyone who's creating for the sake of creating, I think those aren't really the big ideas. It's about solving problems. So COVID being a circumstances, or let's call it a condition, I think was actually very creatively stimulating. So how can I respond to this and build something that, is reactive in response to, and maybe part of it subliminally is survival instincts, right? Whether it's, I don't think I ever feared consciously that it was all over, but, maybe subconsciously, just the way that I operate, the gears inside me said, it's time to think wider, time to think differently. And, COVID sort of forced a lot of physical businesses, to dive more into the digital space, which is something that I've always been sort of detached from. We're sort of analog brand, analog guys to some extent. But as I read an amazing book, by the way, which it seems like you're a pretty avid reader, called Move Fast and Break Things, which is recommended to me by a good friend at a perfect time. Talk about serendipity. If what we're building now makes it big, that'll be, I think, a big moment for me to look back on. But it essentially outlines the entire history of music on the internet, and goes further back and just sort of outlines the emergence of the internet in general, which was not really a history that was so apparent to me. And it really recontextualized technology to me as a whole, because early internet was really founded on more of a altruistic, egalitarian philosophy than we think about it today now, with Whole Earth Catalog, and it was really sort of a countercultural movement with the idea of, I'm sure anyone who's researched Steve Jobs is probably more intimately familiar with the story than I was, but just technology is a means to create community, to connect, and create more widespread, positive change. So that really changed my whole shit up. Just thinking about technology as this thing that was very techy and took us away from each other, and whatever that whole story was, to wait, what is the potential of this thing if I do it in my own way? If I take, the things that we feel are important, our philosophies, our ideologies, and ingrain them to take a unique approach to technology, what would that output be? So I got really excited by the opportunity that building something like that presents, and we dove into it, and have been going through a similarly painstaking process as the build of the space. Not as painstaking, but definitely some similar challenges, and feeling that same sense of excitement, and about to embark on a new journey. So we're excited, and we're excited for it all to connect together, and see where we land on the other side.
Yeah. Is that it? So it's a fully digital platform that you guys are working on?
It's a fully digital platform.
Yeah, that's incredible. Can you share more about it, or is it needs to like come out? It needs to launch.
I'm trying to think if I can articulate in a quick elevator pitch. We're building a new framework for creatives to publish, storytell, and communicate around with a more egalitarian, community-minded foundation. So basically, we believe that within music and in the art itself right now, we've lost a lot of the storytelling elements. I think a lot of that sort of ended with the blog era, sort of deep storytelling around music and art and creation and process and intention. So what we want to create is a new social framework that allows artists and creatives to not only illustrate the depth of their creative process and showcase their work as well as the work of others, but also instill this new culture of mutual championship amongst each other as a replacement for the status quo gatekeeper mentality of institutions that are currently dominating technology platforms.
That makes a lot of sense. Victor Reyes is a good friend of mine, and he's an artist based out of San Francisco, originally a street artist. He was on the show.
I listened to that one.
Okay. Amazing dude. You should definitely, if you're interested in connecting with him, because he's been in the game for a while, and I think what you're trying to create would resonate with him in a very meaningful way. Whenever you're ready. Yeah. He's also just a great human being. Yeah,
it was funny. I enjoyed your conversation.
Yeah. He's we got a chance to work together, and it's funny how like the universe in most of those scenarios, I remember my team was negotiating. They were like, Victor, we can't sign Victor. It's like impossible. He's like, he put us in touch with his lawyer, and I was like, look, can I just meet the guy? Can I just like have a coffee with him? And we connected, and it was one of those people where you instantly connect with, and from that, I've gotten to know him pretty well, and he's a great dude. He's the real deal. He's a great dude. And I actually think he would be interested in helping provide any input or help or whatever, just based on his own experience.
Yeah, I would love to.
I'll connect you guys like a little later today. But one thing I wanted to ask you about as well before we wrap up is the public television component of Public Records, and what spawned that, and what's the idea behind it. Because it's wildly different than anything else that I've seen in a long time.
Yeah. So Public Records closed in March, March 15th or whatever. And, my immediate first reaction was, let's build like an anarchist television station, right? Like this is what we're going to do. There's a fucking pandemic. We have this crazy space with a bunch of characters, like my team, who are all amazing in their own way. We have this crew, we have this space, and we have this following, and we're all shut down. Like, let's create a fucking anarchist television channel. You know what I mean? I was always really interested in this amazing show from the 90s called TV Party that Glenn O'Brien was the host of, and it was like during the no wave scene in New York, Lower East Side in the 80s. And it was just super random. There was no script. I don't, like no wave culture in music. Like if I was a guitarist and you were a drummer and we made a band together, we'd like switch instruments. Like that was just a very like intellectual, but also random, experimental, irreverent movement. And so this show was just like ad lib. Different people would come through. They'd be drunk, they'd be high. And like every awesome band from the era played there. It was just super random and shitty produced, but the like random chance in the production became this whole stylistic vocabulary. You know what I mean? It was this amazing thing, amazing music, just coolest vibe. And, I didn't want to replicate the show, but I was like, let's take that same mentality. Like we're going to be locked down for who knows how long. People are going to be scared. People are going to have all sorts of feelings that we don't even know what the fuck it's going to be. Let's get this on tape. Let's see how people react. Let's see what artists want to create. Let's see how, what kind of weird shit we could do. And let's make sure let's document this time because it's going to be tough, but it's going to be unique, So I was in Texas and I had like my team setting up this like camera rig in the space. Two of my partners had COVID. They were out of commission. And so it was just me remotely on like FaceTime with them, trying to figure out how to build a live stream and also tell them how to set it up with our whole gear. And I literally felt like I was sending these guys into like Chernobyl. Like the looks on their faces were like, they had masks on. We didn't know how bad the virus was. And it was really tough. I was like, is this even, like, I'm not there. I felt a lot of guilt, and it was really tough and really emotional. And then, we realized what the true extent of the virus was. And we said, we can't, this is the last thing we could do is have this on-site party where everyone comes, and this is a bad idea. So we shifted gears and we decided that, we'll just use it as sort of a framework to allow other artists and people in the community to tap into as a medium and express themselves during the lockdown. And so I've been working with these great web designers who are now close collaborators of ours. We work together on a lot of things, and we were designing a new website. And I said, guys, like, can we just put this on pause and just build this TV channel together? And they were like, we're down. And we spent the next week, just day and night building this thing. I had never built, something like that before. And it was so invigorating because, there was no monetary compensation. We weren't paying them. We didn't have any way to make money from it. So it was a purely creative endeavor in just this survival of the instinct time. And it was amazing to see everyone band together and build this thing together with no money at stake. It was amazingly gratifying. And so we built a mechanism for artists to utilize, to tap into it and to raise money through it, through a donate feature or whatever. And it was crazy, because it was just, most of our staff was furloughed. My partner ended up getting better, thankfully, and it was just he and I running it. I was doing sort of like the operation and direction of it, and he was doing the music programming. And it started out with a lot of just sort of weird self-produced stuff where people on the team would create either custom, like works or mixes superimposed over really calming footage that we'd put together in a contextual way, and we framed them as shows. So we did like a show called Ambient Nature, where my partner would do an ambient mix and we would superimpose it under archival footage of like national parks. And weirdly, it got, pretty substantial viewership. We had like a couple hundred people watching on a daily basis. And a lot of people told us that it really provided a lot of calm for them, during that time. And then eventually we started doing a show with New School. We started doing a show with a couple of different big time creative agencies that, were friends of ours. So it became this sort of community co-created thing where everyone was taking this sort of conversation starter, which was the channel, and providing, creating something contextual to it. It was a tremendous amount of work. And, now that we're reopened, we're figuring out ways to, again, capitalize it in some way that's sustainable, but it's not really. So I like to say that we're the only idiots that in this time are trying to build a non-for-profit, extension of our business and a not-for-profit arts program as an extension of our business. But, it's exciting for us, and it's been a great creative outlet for a lot of people. And it certainly has made us feel like, we had the powerful ability to create an even more dynamic organization when we were facing extremely challenging circumstances. So we feel very proud of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's, I think it goes back to your earlier point of like, these are the things that kind of make this place a place where people want to be and come experience it, because there's a genuine creative force that's just testing these things, and like without any, there's no money involved. It's, I don't know. It's a pretty beautiful thing. I love it. Do you have plans of keeping that going and just sort of curating that more and more?
So the space is reopened now. We started to sort of integrate some of the TV programming into the public space. We do these Wednesday night screenings in the garden. We're going to start doing some of the more like artistic experimental things as installations within our live room. So really we think there's an opportunity to evolve it. It started as a cheap TV channel because that was the need or the opportunity at the time, given the circumstances. But what I've realized thinking through it during now this next evolution of the organization is that our value is not in distributing video content. The value is really our ability to bring together creative people and create artistic expressions that are reactive to certain social conditions, right? Which to me is not really about a TV channel. That could be expressed and articulated in a variety of different ways. So, we're going to keep the channel as an asset, but as an asset of a larger endeavor, which is the offshoot of Public Records sort of art initiative.
That's amazing. You really took the time to tap into the energy that you needed right now, because I'm sure being closed was it had to be challenging to make that decision.
Definitely challenging, but also I think valuable in the sense that, I think everyone should find ways to try to take a step aside and create some space and distance from the things that they're so immersed in, because that's often when, big strokes happen. Or maybe we just convinced ourselves of that, but yeah, we found value in being able to have a minute to rethink things and have more of a bird's eye view of the big picture. So at the end of the day, we're just trying to do cool shit.
That's awesome, man. I think we should wrap it up on that note. I think you just dropped the mic.
Yeah, this was a blast, man. And by the way, it was reconnecting. It was been like a highlight of my past couple of weeks. So glad I thought to reach out, and great to be back in touch, and look forward to following, along with this journey you're on, and, contributing in any way that I can. And I would love to keep the dialogue going.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time to do this, because it's a large chunk of time by today's standards. And I really enjoyed this. It was a blast.
Great. Totally.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Shane Davis, Public Records. You can check him out at publicrecords.nyc.com, on Instagram at Public Records NYC. That was a beautiful conversation. Shane he's an enlightened dude. He's been through the gauntlet himself and shared just incredible things. I love the creative force that comes out of him. You can feel that energy, even recording digitally. I'm also excited to see what they are coming up with at Public Records. Their platform sounds amazing. We'll definitely keep you guys posted. Follow those guys. I think they're going to be doing some incredible things. Peace out. Appreciate everybody. Chris Williams, thank you, brother. Appreciate it. And shout out to my mom. Always. Later.